Good morning. I'm Lee LaValle, Chair of the Fair and Affordable Housing Summit with the Human Relations Commission. Welcome, everyone. Did want to share a couple of tidbits about our local market. The current status of our inventory in the MLS system is down to just under 8 months of inventory, which has typically been 12 to 14 months. And we're in our 19th consecutive month of year-over-year gains. So this March is better than last March, and actually by 37%. The greatest volume of homes sold since the year 2008. Another interesting tidbit is that single women over the age of 45, baby boomers, are the second largest segment of home buyers in the market. They're looking for low maintenance homes, large sizable kitchens, laundry rooms near the master bedroom, and a design to stay, so a home that they can stay in and not have to move again. So anyway, just a few tidbits for you on our local market. And now I would like to introduce one of our most diligent and amazing citizens of Winston-Salem, the inimitable and honorable Mayor Alan Joynes.
Good morning, everybody. Can't believe we're back here again. It seems like Wanda and I were just saying, it just seems like a short time ago we were convening to have this summit, and glad to have you back. There are a number of individuals from outside of Winston-Salem, Forsyth County, so let me just add my welcome to you all. Thank you for joining us here in Winston-Salem, Forsyth County, as we discuss issues related to the housing market and fair housing particularly. This is Fair Housing Month in Winston-Salem. We've had a number of events already, and today is always a great, I don't know if it's a culmination necessarily, but it is a clear discussion and discourse about the state of fair housing and housing development in our area, but we'll certainly spill over and talk about the state as well. You'll have a great panel here in a moment and have some good discussion on that. But just wanted to be here as the mayor of the city to say how committed we are as a city government to ensuring that fair housing is offered and the fair housing policies are followed within the city of Winston-Salem. And it's such a great partnership that we have. The Board of Realtors, the developers, the housing market itself joins with us. It's not just us as a city pushing it. It's all of these groups coming together saying we want to work together and make things happen. So I congratulate all the partners to doing that. And we also thank the sponsors for this event today to help make it happen. It'll be a very enjoyable day for you. And thank you all for taking time out of your schedules to be here today as we continue this discussion. Have a great discussion, and I'll see you next year, I guess. Okay.
Thank you, Mayor Joynes. Good morning, everyone. I'm Wanda Allen Abraham, the Director of the Human Relations Department with the City of Winston-Salem. And for those of you who may be looking at your agenda, we're kind of winging it at this point. We're kind of going off course just a tad. But I just wanted to make sure that I was welcoming each and every one of you here. We have people representing so many cities throughout the state. It's not just people who are supporting us here in Winston-Salem and Forsyth County, which is our core, our foundation, our backbone. But we also have people here from Asheville, Raleigh, Durham, Goldsboro, High Point, Charlotte. I'm probably forgetting a couple of cities, Durham, just everywhere. And so we really especially welcome you all to Winston-Salem today. Also, I would like to acknowledge that we have with us our Deputy City Manager, Mr. Derwick Page. Mr. Page, would you please stand and wave so everyone can see you? And so we're quite fortunate in this city to have the support of our City Manager's office and the Office of the Mayor and our City Council. Are there any other elected officials here other than Mayor Joynes? Okay. Also, I would like to have members of the New Horizons Fair Housing Committee to please stand. These committee members helped to plan today's summit, and they have worked very hard on this for several months. And so all members of the committee stand and stay standing so everybody can see you. And let's thank them accordingly. All right, everyone, please continue enjoying lunch and dessert. But we are going to go ahead and get started with the panel discussion. We are very excited to have as a moderator with us Mr. Dan Cornelis, who is the Executive Director for the Forsyth County Housing Department. And for those of you who were able to be with us last year, you know Dan did a phenomenal job, and so he was gracious enough to agree to come back this year to moderate and facilitate today's discussion. But before we delve into that, I would just like to take a moment to mention why we are all here today. The purpose of having this annual Fair and Affordable Housing Summit is to have housing professionals to get together to exchange information. As many of you know, well, everyone here touches housing in some kind of shape, form, or fashion. Whether you are a commissioner on our volunteer board, whether you work for a bank, or whether you work for the government, whether you're a realtor, nonprofit, CDC, all of the above, you touch on housing, housing affordability, or fair housing in some capacity. And so oftentimes, even though we're all partners in our communities across the state, we sometimes don't know what's going on in each other's respective industries. Housing Authority may not know what's going on necessarily with legal aid, or legal aid may not know all that's going on with human relations and the realtors and so on and so forth. And so this is a way for us to all exchange information, give each other updates, to discuss market and industry trends, and to make sure that we really are honoring the fact that this is Fair Housing Month nationwide. And so this is a HUD initiative, it's a HUD program, the fair housing component is for this month. And so we're delighted to be the arm for that here in our community. At this time, I would like to acknowledge the fact that we have been joined also not only by our Deputy City Manager, but we also have our Deputy City Attorney with us who serves as the Fair Housing Attorney for the City of Winston-Salem, and that's Mr. Al Andrews. Al, would you please stand and wave? And I'd like to thank him for coming. We also have our Human Relations Commissioners here. If you are a member of the Human Relations Commission, would you please stand? All Human Relations Commissioners, would you please stand at this time? Thank you, Commissioners. Also, my staff, the Human Relations staff, I hate to do this to you. I know they're like, why did you do that in the middle of us eating? Because they just got their food, so I apologize. But would members of the Human Relations staff please stand and wave to the audience? And of course, without the commission and staff, none of this would have been possible. And our awesome New Horizons Fair Housing Committee who actually planned the logistics of today. And you've already met them a little bit earlier, so I just want to thank them again. Also, I would like to take a moment to thank our sponsors. We have, of course, the New Horizons Fair Housing Committee as a sponsor, the Piedmont Federal Savings Bank, the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development, City of Charlotte Community Relations, City of Winston-Salem Community and Business Development Department, Forsyth County Housing Department, the Housing Authority of Winston-Salem, the Center for Home Ownership, La Valley Properties, the High Point Human Relations Commission, the National Association of Human Rights Workers, and the Winston-Salem Regional Association of Realtors. Can we please give our sponsors a round of applause? So without further ado, I am going to introduce Mr. Dan Cornelis to take over everything from this point forward. Please be mindful of the experts that you have here. We have some dynamic people here on our panel. I urge you to take advantage of the fact that they are here, ask them questions, probe any points that they may make that you'd like further information about. They will be here after the summit is over too for you to talk to one-on-one, but I really encourage everyone just to speak freely. We do have index cards on your tables if you haven't noticed, and you'll see a couple of pens in case you don't have a pen. And what we're going to ask you to do is if you have a question, write your questions down on the index card, and someone from my staff will come around and collect the index cards from you if you don't want to come up to the microphone that will also be passed around the room a little bit later. Okay? All right. Mr. Cornelis, could you take it over from here, please? Thank you.
Thank you, Wanda. Appreciate it. Good afternoon. I hope everybody enjoyed their lunch. I sure did. I ate it a little bit fast, but it was a great lunch, and we appreciate the food. I'm excited about this panel. Every year we come back, and it's always been very interesting to have our folks that on this panel because They're such experts, and they're so good at what they do, and they're real knowledgeable, and so we're really proud to have them also on the panel. Also, it's kind of like family day. You know, everybody comes back, we see each other, and some of us haven't seen each other in a long while, and some of us have maybe seen too much of each other, but it's always good to come back and have this day where we look at fair housing and housing issues in our region. I want to introduce to you our panels today, and I want to start off with Michael Lehman at the bottom. Michael, if you can put your hand up. And he is a longtime real estate appraiser, and he is probably the go-to guy for the county and for the city and for all the folks. When you want a good appraisal and you want a question about appraisal, he's always able to talk to us. And he's been real helpful to our office over the years in trying to figure out what these appraisals meant and what's going on. So we're really glad to have him back. This is his second year in a row, so that's really great. Maybe he didn't answer all the questions that you had last year, so maybe he can answer some more. And Bill McNeil is a long time. I've known Bill for a long time. I think we started back in maybe 1983. It wasn't 1883, it was 1983, I think. And the thing about Bill is he never looks any older. He looks the same as he did in 1983. Bill has served with the Department of Commerce, and it used to be the Natural Resources and Community Development back in the old days. And I will tell you this, I've worked with the Community Development Block Grant Program, and Bill was in charge of it for some years, and it never ran better than when Bill was there. Bill was not your typical bureaucrat. Bill would think outside the box, and when you had a problem, you had a situation where you want to do something, Bill would sit down and talk to you about how we could do it versus how you can't do it. So Bill is working on sustainable community efforts, and he'll tell you more about it, but it's a 12-county regional sustainability project that we've been a part of, and actually we've learned a lot from Bill and that committee. And then third of all, but last but not least is Takesha Red, and she is a legal aid attorney, the managing office here in Winston-Salem is my understanding. She graduated from University of North Carolina Central. Is that correct? Chapel Hill and Central. She got both those colleges. And she's going to talk to us about fair housing issues, which is really what today is all about. So I want to start it off with Michael Lehman. And Mike, if you come to the podium, what we're going to do is we have a list of questions. I'd like to say that they don't know what those questions are going to be, but they have been versed on them ahead of time. So we may surprise them with a few off-the-cuff remarks. The first thing I'd like to have is Mike ask the question. I'm answering the question. Asking the question, how does the new Forsyth County tax values affect buyers and sellers? Does anybody not know that we had a revaluation year this year? How many people lost on their houses, or lost value according to tax? I lost 20,000, so I was a little upset about it until I started looking around and seeing what my neighbors sold their houses for, and I was dismayed that they sold them for a lot less than I thought they were. So it's been a kind of topsy-turvy world in the appraisal, the government appraisal side, but I think one of the questions that we have is, how are these appraisals that are coming in affect the typical homeowner in Forsyth County today?
Well, the short answer to that is the tax value shouldn't have anything to do with it. Any of you who are in the real estate business and have seen any listing sheets or looked in the newspaper or online, there's a pretty common thread in the comments on a lot of listings these days. It says, 30,000 under tax value, 10,000 under tax value. And that's the old tax values. That's not the new tax values. I'm, totally expecting, comments here in the next few months to say $40,000 over tax value. It's probably not going to happen, but it would make about as much sense. But really, tax value and current market value are two altogether different things. While the legal definition of tax value is supposed to be market value, it's really a little different market value. For one thing, the tax value is done by a mass appraisal system. and I'm kind of getting into question number 2, which is the difference between tax value and appraised value. How many people in this room have ever had anybody from the tax office actually come and look at your house, by a show of hands? Okay, 1, I saw 2, 3, 4, 5, okay. Now, the 5 of you who said they had, was it a result of this last reevaluation, or was it before that? Before that, okay. Well, this is probably a pretty good sampling. And if you look at the number of people in this room, and you've got 5 people who the tax office has actually seen their house. Now, what does that tell you? They probably don't know a whole lot about it. I mean, they have historical records. I mean, if your house was built in the last 15 years, they may have had a set of plans originally when the house was built. A lot of times those plans get changed, so even then, you know, what they have may not be totally accurate. So, you know, they don't necessarily have a good database for square footage of how large your house is. If you've done anything in the way of remodeling to your house, if that was done outside of the permitting process, then they probably don't have any idea that was done. Now, I know every year on your listing form it asks if you've done any, you know, significant improvements, and I'm sure everyone is always honest about that because we all want to pay more taxes. Bottom line is, it's a totally different system. It's based somewhat on statistics, and it's good for the purpose it's designed for. On the other hand, when you go to sell your house or when you go to buy a house, you need a little bit better information than that because you're doing it for another reason. You're basically doing it for the largest single investment most people will ever make. So you want to have professionals involved in that, you know, that know something about the value of your individual property. Buying and selling property by tax value, I mean, it just doesn't work. It's like going to a new car dealership and trying to buy a car by the pound. I mean, that will give you a number, but it's probably not a very reliable number. I'm not throwing the tax office under the bus here. This last reevaluation has created some challenges that, you know, due to an economic situation that most people in this room, you know, are not old enough to have ever seen anything like it before. The limitations of that system, you know, are going to cause some problems. For instance, if you have an area that is, you know, defined as one of their geographic appraisal areas, and during the time that they pull data to do the reevaluation, if there are only 2 sales in that entire geographic area, and both of them were foreclosures, then you're going to end up with some pretty unrealistic numbers. I know I've seen, you know, several articles in the newspaper, people talking about, you know, my house used to be worth $154,000 and now it's worth $52,000. No, it's not. There are probably several things going on there. Number one, it may not have really been worth $154,000 when the 2008 reevaluation was done. I mean, the 2008 reevaluation was based on data when the market was at an absolute high. And there were some of those numbers that were a little unrealistic. What we're dealing with now is we have a situation where we've had a lot of low sales. Those low sales have affected things just because of the limitations of the way state statute requires the tax office to do reevaluations, and you end up with some unrealistic low numbers. Now, do you appeal that? I sure wouldn't. I mean, if, you know, they want to tax me on $52,000 and I think my house is worth $125,000, fine. If you appeal it, you know, they're probably going to raise the value. But just remember, when the commissioners and Board of Aldermen set a tax rate, they're going to have to readjust that tax rate because, the revenue base has dropped. So, you're inviting them to send you a bigger tax bill. Now, if you're a long-term planner, that might not be a bad thing to do, because when the next reevaluation comes around, I can tell you what the newspaper articles are going to be saying then. My house was worth $52,000 and now it's worth $180,000. How could that happen? My tax bill tripled. And, somebody write this down on an index card and, put it away somewhere. This is going to happen. In the appraisal business, we talk about credible values. I mean, credibility is, the big deal. You can have a number that technically is correct, but it may not be credible. I mean, the tax office can do their job, perfectly correct, but come up with a number that's really not believable. They can go in and they can fix some of that, but, there are, thousands of properties in Forsyth County, and they do not have the manpower to go in and look at every one of them. So from that standpoint, if you think your tax value is just way out of whack, and, you don't want to run into a situation, come the next reevaluation where you have a major crisis and can't pay your tax bill, it may be reasonable to try to get them to get that a little more, in line with today's market.
Michael, I want to just ask you another question, and that's the third question we were looking at, and is, do the new tax valuation have an impact on affordable housing in our area? And so, does it affect the affordable housing market than it does in other markets, or middle income or higher income housing? Does it have more of an effect on affordable housing than any other market?
As far as whether it makes affordable housing more or less, available, I don't think so. The only thing that some of these numbers is going to affect, a lot of people shop for real estate now over the internet. That's the first place they look. Then they go get a broker and say, I found this property on the internet and I want to go look at it. You've got third-party sites out there. You've got Zillow, Trulia, and there's, probably 10,000 more. And I'm sure all of you have heard of the Zestimate. That's, Zillow's automated valuation model that tells you what a house is worth. Well, they rely on tax data. They have some data, from MLS sources around the country, but that's a combination of all kinds of data. When they pull in some of these tax, values that are pretty unrealistic right now, some of those estimates are going to be, just way out of whack. But, as far as affecting affordable housing, if people rely on that data, most of the numbers are going to be low. So, it could make housing very affordable if you can get anybody to sell it at that number.
So, Mike, I appreciate we're going to move on, but what we want to do is take questions at the end. So we're going to have each of the participants, the panelists, make a presentation, and then hold your questions, please, till the end. And we're going to have about, I think, 25, 30 minutes to have questions. Next, I'd like to have Bill McNeil come up, and got a few questions for him. Bill has been working on the Piedmont Triad regionalism. Bill, this is not on here, but first of all, I'd like to have you talk about the project and what it entails, which counties it involves, and so forth. So I just want you to give us a brief overview.
Let me give you the short story. Thank you, Dan. I'm working with the Piedmont Triad Regional Council, which is our COG for this 12-county region, on a big project called Piedmont Together. 2 years ago, HUD picked our region, our 12-county region, as one of 45 around the country to work on something called a regional plan for sustainable development. We've had working groups, and one of them involves a housing work group that Mellon Parker and Gary Merritt and Dan have been sharing their time on this working group. We have also teams working on transportation, economic development, workforce, green infrastructure, parks, and recreation. All of this is asking the big question that everyone in our region, I think, needs to find answers. In the next 20 years, we're going to gain 400,000 people in our region. We're going to grow from roughly 1,600,000 to about 2 million in this 12-county region. Where are those 400,000 people going to live? How will they be able to afford where they live? How are they going to get back and forth to where they go to school or go to work? And where are they going to work? Big questions. We're about 2/3 the way into it. About a year from now, we'll be wrapping it up with a draft plan that we want as many eyes and ears watching and listening to and feeding comment back. But housing is definitely one key to the puzzle. We're also looking at jobs and transportation options.
Bill, what changes do you foresee in the region, and how will they affect everyone's search for good, affordable housing? I know we've met quite often, and we've had some great debates, great conversations, and a lot of learning going on. But as a region, what do you see as the future for affordable housing?
Probably the biggest insight that we've gained, we had some research done into looking into the market, the demand side. Here we are in 2013, but the next generation of households, the next 20, 30,000 households growing in our community want a different type of housing than what we have. We have heard through our research that the biggest growth sectors in the market are 20-somethings and then older people, people who want to age in place. The 20-somethings want more compact, walkable communities. They're more interested in liveliness in their sense of place, being close to where the action is, than they are in the quarter-of-acre or half-acre lot to mow every week. So we're predicting, and we see in several cities around the region, the multifamily developers are responding by trying to bring more multifamily townhouse condo product to get ready for this emerging demand.
Yeah, I think that's interesting. I just want to interject. There's a couple of communities, 2 or 3 communities in Winston-Salem that they've actually built single-family homes and they're renting them out. And they're not renting them out because they can't sell them. They were built to rent out. And I'm amazed at how quickly they have filled up and the occupancy level of those. So that's a whole new market that I don't think I would ever have thought we would see, but we have.
One more comment on impact on affordable housing. Everything we're seeing, and this is verified by the research that we've done, the pressure is on the existing stock of rental housing. I don't know if we have rental market rate managers in the room, but you're probably seeing that your vacancy rates that might have been 8-9% 3 years ago, they're probably going down to 5%, 4%, and that puts upward pressure on rents. It's good for the apartment managers. It's bad for those who are looking for entry-level rentals to move into this market.
So, Bill, what is the Piedmont Together project going to do to help housing in the region? What is it going to do to promote the housing, to identify the housing, and how we might look at the future housing?
Okay. Let me first window you all into something that HUD is calling for us as one of these regional test cases to do. Has anybody heard of something called a FIA, other than Mellon and Gary and Dan? A FIA is a Fair Housing Equity Assessment. HUD is asking us, and we're in the middle of working on this assessment of a fair housing equity analysis or assessment. Through that, we're identifying where do we now have areas of high segregation areas of high poverty, something called RCAPs, or racially concentrated areas of poverty, and ECAPs, ethnically concentrated areas of poverty. We know we have a pretty good handle on where they are. The next part of our analysis is, well, do we want to invest public dollars, both HUD funding and USDA funding, to further concentrate high poverty areas, affordable housing only in high poverty areas, or can we develop the will and the good, sensible policies to guide where those next HUD and USDA developments will be outside of concentrated areas of poverty? So we're developing a set of recommendations around where will the next wave of affordable housing go? Can it be directed in places that are more locationally efficient? And by that I mean close to transit, close to job opportunities, and close to services. What policies can we encourage our local governments to put in place, whether it's overhauling zoning ordinances that are too restrictive on multifamily development, or connecting transit plans to housing plans. It's a combination of looking at housing not just as housing, but as housing plus transportation.
Bill, you know, I know over the years when we write grants to the federal government and to the state government, we have to do a housing plan, and we do it for our local government, our local jurisdiction. It seems like there's some movement on some folks that they want to go to a regional approach for fair housing. Where are we at that? Are we planning to do a regional fair housing plan?
It's a feed question, I guess. But the answer is yes, but we will have a housing element and a set of housing recommendations within the regional plan for sustainable development. We're intending that it will guide HUD investment in the future. We hope to get USDA rural development on board so that they will make their next investments, particularly in multifamily housing, so they're closer to the downtown areas of a Reidsville or a Moxville, and not well beyond services. Everything we're seeing from HUD, they're encouraging fair housing communities to look at fair housing regionally, and we're conducting this FIA, Fair Housing Equity Assessment, regionally. Now, you could ask why. It's because housing markets are regional, labor markets are regional, people are commuting all over the place. It doesn't make any sense to have Winston-Salem planning as if the world dropped off at the edge of the city of Winston-Salem or Forsyth County. So we need to both look regionally and then frame some recommendations for where future HUD and USDA development will be in our region.
And our last inquisitive question, people talk about social equity, but what can anyone do about it?
Social equity is one of those terms not unlike sustainability, where everybody has a different definition of it. My take on social equity, and we're trying to look at transportation systems and workforce development systems and housing in part with an equity lens. I guess it takes some honest thinking, some honest talk, that some people are doing well in this economy. Some people are able to make it in the housing arena, and others are not. The disparities between what new immigrants experience in our region and what people who have been here for 20 years or 30 years, the gaps are phenomenal. We need to be honest about that. The same thing about a racial gap. It's regions that have tackled equity issues and come up with sensible ways of working together to help those who have dropped out of the workforce regain the skills, or those who are being discriminated in the housing market, which is, I think, one of the emphases of fair housing, anybody serious about fair housing. So we're hoping that we're going to infuse equity considerations in all recommendations in this plan.
Thank you, Bill. Appreciate it. Can you give Bill a big hand, please? Our next speaker is Takesha Red, and she's with Legal Aid, and she's going to talk a little bit about fair housing and affordable cases and issues. The first question I pose to you is, what are some of the most prevalent trends that you will see in the housing discrimination complaints?
Well, before I take that, I want to back up and say our office is just one of the 23 or 24 statewide legal aid offices that covers all 100 counties. However, I believe it was in the fall of 2011, Legal Aid of North Carolina instituted a statewide fair housing project. So some of the data and the statistics I will discuss today came from those brains in Raleigh who were able to give me a broader picture, because we just see what we get in our now 9-service county area, which is Forsyth, Stokes, Davie, Yadkin, Wilkes, Ashe, Allegheny, and there are 2 more that I just forgot. But for our local office, the prevalent trends that we see come in the form of disability cases as it relates to reasonable accommodation requests or reasonable modification requests. And because of the type of client, our clients are in the lower income brackets. And so it almost always involves either a subsidized housing, a multifamily subsidized housing project, or it is a private landlord-tenant situation where there is a housing choice voucher involved. So those have been the ones that we see coming through the door most recently, but there are still claims of discrimination based on familial status, race, and we've also seen an increase in the number of the sexual harassment and sexual assault cases in the private landlord-tenant context. And that is unfortunately something that we do not want to see more of. And I know that the we have referred a couple of people to the actual Human Relations Department here in Winston-Salem so that they can do an investigation to handle those claims.
Thank you. What are some of the repeated issues with affordable housing related cases? Some that you see over and over again, and you may have answered that already, but what is the most grievous ones I think that you've seen in the last year or two?
And I don't know, again, if it's just because of what I see come across my desk or if it's an actual trend out in the community. It is looking at reasonable accommodation requests and reasonable modification requests in a more broad manner. Sometimes it may be something as simple as an apartment complex that has a no pet policy saying that a service animal is a pet. Well, no, a service animal is not a pet, and you can have a no pet policy. However, you know, is there a way that we can get this policy modified or to accommodate this tenant? Another one is if the housing involved is privately owned, however, the tenant has a disability and may need rails installed or ramp installed. Who bears the cost of that? What is the procedure for requesting it? What is the timeline? Those we've seen a lot of. And then for our reasonable accommodation requests for disabilities, it could be something such as changing the due date of the rent payment because if the person's Social Security disability doesn't come until the 15th of the month, but the rent is due on the 1st and the person is habitually paying late, and then the landlord decides to evict them, well, what we would do is we would submit a modification, an accommodation request saying, well, let's make the rent due on the 15th, late on the 20th, and so that way the tenant is not put in any stressful situation because they're not able to pay their rent and everybody's happy. So what we try to do when we get those cases in is to take a step back and to think outside of the box and say, well, what is a way that we can accommodate this tenant so they could have the full use and enjoyment of their rental unit at the same time respecting the landlord's the landlord's rules and regulations and not asking them to do something that will be an administrative burden or a financial burden.
I am going off script here a little bit again, and one of the questions I have is, what's the process, dude? If I had a complaint against my landlord and I felt like that something was not right, and the landlord doesn't solve it, would I go to Human Relations first? Would I go to Legal Aid first? And if I go to Human Relations, do they refer you to Legal Aid, or does the Legal Aid refer to Human Relations? What's that relationship?
Well, it depends on where in the process you are. If we typically get involved when there's an eviction notice posted on a door, or somebody saying, "Hey, I got court tomorrow." So that's typically when it comes to our desk. If they were to come early on and say, "Hey, my landlord did this, where do I need to go?" That would be great. So because of that, we have to have a very flexible and working relationship with the Human Relations Department. If someone comes to us and it's early enough in the process where we feel like a mediation or just, a sit down and with a non-interested third party to kind of flesh through the issues and come up with a solution that works for both people, if it's early enough in the process, what we will do is we will refer them to Human Relations and say, "Hey, we'll suspend this file for right now. If you get it resolved on that end, it's great, everybody's happy, but if not, then we can reopen it and look at it from a legal standpoint if you're gonna go to court or, if it requires some further action." But we've actually been able to refer cases that come in early enough to Human Relations. And then they also have people that will come to them and they're a little further along in the process, or communications have just broken down to the extent that it's not gonna be resolved. And then that's when Human Relations will refer clients to us and we'll take it from there.
Thank you. What are some of the fair housing initiatives being undertaken across the city, county, state, and how do they pertain to affordable housing?
Now, that's what another question that our Raleigh folks provided for us. One of the exciting things that they are doing in our Raleigh statewide office, and we've not had an opportunity to have any of it going on here, they actually hired, I think it was maybe about 6 months ago, a testing coordinator. And so when certain claims or if certain actors continue to appear, or we think that there's a pattern or a practice, we now have a testing coordinator on staff who can, come up with a test, send testers in to figure out, is this a random occurrence? Is there something going on that needs more investigation? And if it is something that's going on, the test subjects that they send in have been versed so they know what questions to ask, so that we'll have an idea if that needs to be pursued more, or just some education. Because a lot of times, especially when we deal with I like to make a distinction between people who have houses that they want to rent and then people who are landlords. Because you have some people who may have inherited a property or found themselves with an empty house and they just rent it out, but they're not in the business of being a landlord. And so in those instances, I find that if you go in and you just educate them, this is what the law is, this is what you can or cannot do, they're very grateful for it, and we tend to not have repeated problems, whereas, if it's a larger operation, there's a little, more layers. You have to get to the right person who can make a decision on a policy. So just when we go in initially, we want to go in from an education standpoint. We're not, beating down your door to sue you. We just want to sit down and have a conversation to make sure you understand what the law requires, what our tenants' rights are, what your rights are, and how we can proceed from there.
So far, it seems like we talked a lot about the rental market. I'd like to have you touch a little bit on how these common legal issues you see which affect the mortgage lenders and realtors and property managers. So, is there still redlining taking place? Is there still folks that are not seeing the neighborhoods they may want to see? Is there still issues like that within our market?
Well, in the strictly Takesha Red opinion, I can't speak for anyone else, I would say that it is going on. However, that is the type of question that would have to be answered with the use of testers and more discrete analysis. I think that because of the recent, I think there are lawsuits pending against a few lenders now with respect to the foreclosure market and how certain communities of color were targeted, and they were sold loans and packaged, and so now you have complete areas of the city that is 90% foreclosure rate because of how it was targeted when they were selling the houses. And so to a certain extent, I think that is still going on, but it is a sensitive issue and it has to be teased out, and so that's something that if that type of complaint came into our office, we would immediately contact the folks in Raleigh to get them involved, because that would require a little bit more than just a nice, hey, this is Keisha from Legal Aid, I have a couple of questions, could you answer them for me?
You got to go get the bulldogs.
Right. The people who know way more about it than I do.
Keisha, thank you. What we're going to do is to give Keisha a hand, please. We're going to take some questions now from the audience. And I think, how many minutes do we have left to do that? 2 or 3 hours, or? We make these people pay for their meal, right? So anyway, we do have the panelists here. We'd love to take some questions from the audience. I don't know. I think we probably don't need a microphone unless you're a real soft talker, but if you talk like me, you probably don't need one. So if I have any questions, we'd be glad to take them now. And if you state your name and who you're with when you make the question. You can't. Okay, Joe. Oh, okay. Okay. This is to Mike. How did the property revaluation impact the value of multifamily housing development?
Multifamily housing from the appraisal side would really be considered more a commercial issue than it would be a single-family residential, obviously. I have not heard of any, major discrepancies in that area. The foreclosure activity was not really going on in the commercial market, or not that particular segment of the market, to the extent that it was in the single family. So there really hasn't been a major impact on that part of the market, not as far as tax value.
Let's go away from tax values and talk about real, like, market values. Wouldn't it increase the value of the rental units since you'd be using more of a income approach? And if the rents are going up, wouldn't the properties become more valuable?
Yeah, the vacancy rate's going down, and the rents going up obviously is going to increase the value of rental property. The rental market right now is about as strong as I've seen it, in a long time. I've got, property manager friends who say that they're renting properties before they can even get them on their website. They've got people calling and saying, I need a 3-bedroom, 2-bath house, and I want it in a certain school district, or, I work at a certain location. I want to be within a 10 or 15-minute drive of there. And, they'll go out, they'll look at a property for a listing, and they'll already have, 5 or 6 people on the list that want that house before they can even get it on the website. So, yeah, the rental property values will go up based on the income approach.
Another question?
Yes, hi. Al Higgins with the City of High Point. This is a fair housing question for the legal aid representative. I know many times we have had complainants to come in and file a complaint with us, and as we go through the mediation process, it turns out that the complainant will find that they need representation, and then they will go to the legal aid in Greensboro, and legal aid will assign them an attorney to help them through that mediation process. If it is not mediated effectively and there is a cause issue saying that discrimination has occurred, then the complainant usually has, a choice to determine if legal aid or if the city will represent them to continue to carry that case forward. How do you and Winston-Salem, how do y'all handle that together?
Well, for each office has its own staffing with particular levels of expertise, and so whether or not an attorney in that office would take the case at whatever stage and work with the Human Relations Division in that city is going to depend on the resources at that time, which is why we have our statewide program in Raleigh. Depending on what the issues are and where the client comes in, because if they come in early enough and there's time for them to pursue the state fair housing tract, and they don't have to pursue it, like whether it's an affirmative case or a defensive case. And as I said, ours typically come in, they've already been sued. And so at that point, any fair housing complaint is typically going to be raised as an affirmative defense to the eviction action that's already been filed by the landlord. But if it's a situation where it's early on, there's a human relations investigation or a mediation going on, we would have someone to speak with the human relations officer handling the case at that point to kind of brainstorm about what the best course of action is in light of any statute of limitations issues, or if it's a federal question, or if it's a state question, or whether it needs to be filed as a HUD complaint versus a counterclaim. Those are going to be very case-specific decisions that'll be made with the local representative, someone from our Fair Housing Project in Raleigh, and then someone from the City Human Relations Department.
I did get a note from Wanda. She said that the Human Relations did some testing in 11/12, which was November of 2012, and 30% of the folks screened showed discrimination, including steering. So that's an interesting number. And I don't know if Wanda wants to talk a little bit more about that at some point in time, but 30% seems like a pretty large number to me. So. Any more questions? Oh. Can you challenge a mortgage property appraisal? If so, what is the process?
No.
We are the government.
Yes, you can, and there are actually some very specific rules of how you have to do that. First of all, it depends on what type of loan you are applying for. If you are applying for either an FHA or a USDA backed mortgage, you have to request a reconsideration of value, and that has to be approved by the FHA underwriter. The underwriter is the only one who can ask an appraiser to reconsider the value. If you're dealing with a conventional mortgage, the particular lender will probably have their own standards and their own procedures to go through. But by state statute and federal banking regulations, you cannot attempt to influence an appraiser. But what you can do, if you feel like you do not have a fair value, you can first of all request that any errors, any factual errors in the appraisal be corrected. The second thing you can do is you can provide factual information to the appraiser. If you think you have better comps than what the appraiser used, you can present those, and typically you don't do this directly with the appraiser. Typically you supply this information to your lender then reviews it, and if the lender feels there is some merit in your request, then they will pass it on to the appraiser, and the appraiser will have to give a written response to that. But the types of things that you need to present to the lender, you've got to have factual information. I mean, just saying that, my neighbor's house sold for this, that's not going to impress anybody. You've got to have documented evidence. You need to have comps that typically are, more similar, closer to the subject, sold, within a more recent time than what the appraiser used, or if you just have a better comp that the appraiser did not use. You can submit that information. And as I said, the first review is by the lender, and in a lot of cases the lender will look at it and decide that, they don't think the information you've submitted warrants any further review, and the appraiser may never see it. But that's basically how the process works.
We were dealing with a lot of foreclosures with our neighborhood stabilization program, and we dealt with a lot of appraisers, and it's interesting. I learned a lot that I didn't know, and one of the things is that once you have an FHA appraisal on a property, it's a period of time before any other appraisal can really be taken on that property. Is that correct?
Yeah, it used to be that once an FHA appraisal was done, you could not have another one done for 6 months. I think they now have backed off to 3 months on that. And there are some circumstances where if, let's say, lender A starts out with a mortgage, they order an FHA appraisal, for whatever reason, the borrower backs out or goes to another lender, whatever. When you start over at the second lender, if you're still within that time frame and you're doing an FHA loan, you have to use that same appraisal. The only situations where you don't have to use that appraisal is if the second underwriter reviews that appraisal and the second underwriter does not feel that appraisal is credible, then the second underwriter can ask for a second appraisal. Or if there is some delay in transferring that appraisal from one lender to another that would interfere with the closing and cause the borrower some hardship, either through rate locks or whatever, they can order a second appraisal then.
Thank you. For Takesha, who bears the cost of making a property handicap-friendly, the landlord or the tenant?
The answer to that question is going to depend on whether it's a federally subsidized property, if it receives Section 504 funding or HUD funding, or if it's a private landlord-tenant situation. My understanding is that in a private landlord-tenant situation, the tenant bears the cost of the modification. However, if it's a multifamily or HUD-subsidized property, then it would be the landlord, it would be the landlord, housing authority, property management company, and then in a housing choice voucher situation, it's typically going to fall again on the tenant. On the tenant.
Next question has to deal with appraisal again, and it's, as a real estate professional, are you concerned that appraisers may not be qualified for your local market? What can one do? Example, appraiser requests pine needles to be removed from the house in Forsyth County. It sounds like maybe there's a few drive-by appraisals taking place.
Oh, yeah. Those of you who have heard me talk at some of the Board of Realtors training sessions have heard me say some things that some of you found quite unbelievable. But there is one standard that every appraiser has to meet. And it is incumbent on a lender who hires an appraiser to make sure that an appraiser meets that standard. And that is, you must have geographical competence. Now, that's not to say that an appraiser from Burlington can't come to Winston-Salem and do a credible appraisal. They can. You know, for that matter, an appraiser from Atlanta could come to Winston-Salem and do a credible appraisal. But the bottom line is they have to spend enough time here to know this market. They have to be able to access adequate information on comps, on listings, any information that's necessary to do that appraisal. So it's not necessarily a matter of where you come from, it's a matter of how much you know about this area. Now, I have reviewed appraisals that were done by appraisers that came from Columbia, South Carolina. And it took about 10 minutes to figure out they should have stayed in South Carolina. I've done appraisals, review appraisals, done by people in Greensboro that were working in Moxville that, never should have crossed through Forsyth County. But then again, I have also done some reviews from appraisers who came from Chapel Hill, and they did a very credible job because they spent the time to know the local market, they have access to the local data, and, they can do a good job. But I have told agents who have asked me this question, how do we prevent that? And it is not inappropriate for a listing agent or for an owner to ask an appraiser, how much work do you do in this area? Do you belong to the local MLS system? Where do you get your data? And if the area code on their cell phone is 803, and they say, well, I just stopped by a real estate agent's office when I come to town, that's not a real good sign. And it is not inappropriate for you to tell them, look, I can't tell the lender who is going to appraise this house, but I can tell him who's not going to. And you can go back to the lender and say, I do not feel like this individual has geographical competence And I request that you send another appraiser who is competent, and don't let them in the house.
Bar the door.
Yeah.
This is for Takesha again. Can tenants receive interest on their deposits they put down?
I think that answer is going to depend on how the security deposit is held. There's a specific section in Chapter 42 that deals with security deposits, and of course, I did not bring Chapter 42 with me. So what I would recommend is for the property owner who has that question to perhaps consult with either the management company that they've hired to manage the property, or the attorney that they've retained, and hopefully they've retained one, to help them out with their leasing issues. Because my understanding is that if it's held in an interest-bearing account, then the tenant may be entitled to it. But again, it's been a very long time since I've looked at that statute, and I don't want to state that conclusively.
Got you. Yes.
There was a question earlier about addressing and trying to bring about social equity. And in Guilford County, that's been a very big push as well among many of the organizations there. The municipalities, the healthcare system, the school system, we've all been partnering to look at how do we begin to introduce into social equity this whole piece around institutional and structural racism and also implicit bias. And so can you please tell me what you've done to address that whole aspect around social equity?
I'm delighted to hear that. We are forming a social equity network to share information around our region. And after we finish here, I'd like to have it. We have CDCs and others, and we're trying to broaden the discussion.
Bill, while we got the mic on you, I wanted to ask you a question. And one of the things that this country is known for is having boom-bust cycles. We went through a home ownership cycle that maybe got a little out of hand and got loans that maybe should not have been made. And now it seems like everybody wants to be in the rental business. And we're building left and right. Do you foresee that we are going to have another bubble in the rental side of the market? Maybe that's not a fair question to ask you, but
I don't know the market well enough, but I think that there is a tendency to overread short-term trends and treat them as if they're going to last for 20 and 30 years. And I'm a little apprehensive personally. Yep. I'm a little apprehensive about believing that everybody coming into this market is going to be flooding the rental side of the market and ignoring home ownership. As far as whether there will be a bubble and then a bust, I hope it's sure going to be shorter and flatter than anything we've seen in the past 5 years. But we need to watch the market very carefully, not overread, calibrate it right. But if I were putting money in, I sure would be looking at building in and around existing communities, infill policies, and encouraging development of all sorts close to services, jobs, and transit.
thank you. Yes, Bill.
What are you seeing in terms of multi-generational housing?
We're hearing about that, and I think it's one of those trends that we would want to encourage, whether it's the so-called granny flats or intentional homes that are intentionally designed and constructed for mom or dad in one side of it and the growing family in another side. We're looking at the possibility of, is there enough merit in what I'll call share a home brokering, so that an older, elderly homeowner with a 5-bedroom house might be put together, paired up carefully with a younger single individual or single mom who can also provide some services to the older person. That's being done, it has been done in Greensboro. We'd like to see if there's a sensible way to do it around other places in the region.
Bill, don't you think that's happening quite often with your college kids that they can't find a job and they come home and they live back with you again? So.
Absolutely. In my neighborhood, I think I can look at 5 houses around me, and 3 out of the 5 have the kid or the daughter who's there hoping to get the job and then move out eventually. So.
Any other questions? I do want to recognize Satana DeBerry. Hey, would you please stand up? No, I'm not going to put you on the spot, but she is the new director of the Affordable Housing Coalition. The Affordable Housing Coalition is a big friend to affordable housing across the state. I get a newsletter from you, I think, once a month, and every 2 weeks. Maybe I read it once a month, but I've been found out. But when I read it every other month, it always has great news in it. It tells you what's going on across the state and news that you don't get. They seem to be able to be the group that puts together all the affordable housing news across the state in one place. And it's very informative, and it kind of lets you know what may be happening in Raleigh. And is it true that the General Assembly is in session now? So would you like to say a few words about what your all's mission is, and is there a microphone there for her? And we're glad to have you as the executive director. We know you'll do a great job, and you know the coalition has always been a good friend of affordable housing. We appreciate your all's work.
Thank you. The North Carolina Housing Coalition, you can reach us on the website at nchousing.org. We're a membership organization. We do everything from homelessness to home ownership. So we're a membership organization of groups across the state who are interested in housing for low to moderate income North Carolinians. We do advocacy in the General Assembly as well as in Congress. We work with tax credit developers, both nonprofit and for-profit, in advocating in the General Assembly for the State Housing Trust Fund and the low income tax credit, which almost every community in North Carolina now has a tax credit development, either for seniors or for working families. And that's an important tool in increasing the quality stock of safety, decent, affordable housing in North Carolina. We do a newsletter every 2 weeks called Housing Matters. If you go to our website, nchousing.org, and sign up for it, you'll get it automatically. I invite all of you to join. Individual membership is $35. Organizational membership is a bit more. But call our membership director, John Niffenegger, and we can work out a plan that works for you, because we want everybody to be a part of the coalition and to benefit from the work that we do. So, and thank y'all for having me.
Thank you. I would like to give the opportunity for, if somebody has like some events that may be coming up that you want to share. Maybe we shouldn't talk about selling private houses here, but we would like to tell you if you have a public event that you're staging or wanting to folks to come to. I have one, so that's why I decided to bring this up. We have a group, and it's the American Dream Network, and Heather with the Board of Realtors has been very good about helping us market that program. And we're of the belief that homeownership dream is still alive, and that's why I kind of pushed that question to Bill. We know there's a lot of people out there that still want to buy that first home. And I want to tell you that the Center for Home Ownership, which is a whole table full of young ladies over here that work with first-time home buyers, I think they've helped over 1,200 first-time home buyers buy their American dream. And so as a result of that, we wanted to put home ownership back out in the forefront in our community. And therefore, we're having on June 29th a special occasion, and it's called the American Dream Celebration. And we're inviting all 1,200 folks to come back, and we are going to have it at the S.G. Atkins, and what do we call that? The Enterprise building, which is a wonderful building. And we hope to have a lot of folks. We're inviting people from the community. And we're also inviting them to bring a friend that doesn't own a home yet. And so every one of you is invited. We'd love to know that you're coming, though, because we are going to be cooking hot dogs. Again, it will be June 29th. It's a Saturday, and it will run from 10 to 2, I'm sorry. I'll probably go home at 12, but no. So does anybody else have an event they want to discuss? If not, yes, please.
Well, in High Point, this coming Saturday, we are having our High Fest, which is our multicultural festival. And we will have a focus on fair, safe, and affordable housing, as well as looking at the diverse cultures that are in High Point. So there are going to be lots of performances, lots of education, there's going to be food, and a real good time. So we hope that you will join us. It will be downtown in front of the High Point Theater, outside.
Thank you for sharing that. Twelve to 5, she says.
And if you're not going to High Point, if you're venturing over towards Orange County, North Carolina, if you're venturing that way, this Saturday we're also going to have an event that's from 12 to 2. You can contact me or through Wanda about more information and details of how to get there. It is a Fair Housing Month celebration. So we love the symposium such as this today, but we're going to flip it and do more of a celebratory atmosphere for the 45th anniversary of the Federal Fair Housing Act.
Thank you for sharing. Bill, it's good to know that regionalism is alive, isn't it? Even Orange County. Anybody else? Wanda, do you want to close us out? Oh, I'm sorry.
I just want to say, if you all want to submit your events to housing matters, we'd love to have them, because we'd love to be able to promote your event. So just submit it to our. She wasn't talking to me.
Thank you, Satana. Thank you, Satana. Anyone else? City of Goldsboro.
I know you're probably having problems traveling down east. So if you do happen to come down east on Saturday, we're also doing a fair housing piece, and we're going to do a special piece on grant writing. Why you haven't received a grant, why you should receive one, the things you need to know about grant writing with Project Hope. And that's in the morning from 8 to 12, free.
Center for Home Ownership, do you have anything you'd like to announce? ESR? Anybody local? Anything else you want to announce? Last call? And I thank the cities from around the state who are here and who are announcing what's going on statewide, because indeed it is the 45th anniversary of the Fair Housing Act. And that is something that I really should have said on the outset. So I thank James. I think it was James who mentioned that. So thank you, Orange County, for reminding us all of that. This is a very big deal, and that makes it especially wonderful and special that we all got together today to exchange information. But if we don't have any other announcements, I would just like to talk about some next steps. Challenges to you. You've gotten a lot of information today, and was our panel not great? Let's give them a round of applause. They shared lots of information. You've heard a lot of information coming from the floor. I challenge each of you to go back to your respective agencies and cities and implement some of what you've learned. Pretty much, we overlap in what we do, if you think about it. We overlap in serving the community. We all know that. But a lot of the people that we serve, we kind of, see off and on throughout the years. I may mention a name to certain agencies, and they're like, oh, yeah, we know that name. It could be good, maybe not so great, but anyway. But we do overlap. And so we should take advantage of that and share information. And just because it's not your agency that may provide a service doesn't mean that you cannot share another agency's information and what their services are. So again, I challenge everyone to just take that information back, share it, disseminate it, and feel free to network with one another. One thing that we noticed here in Forsyth County is that we could do a better job with networking. We really could. And statewide we could. And that's why the Housing Coalition is such a great resource, because if we are all members of the Housing Coalition, then we could certainly have a statewide way of keeping in touch, which should help us in turn locally. So I encourage you to talk to Satana. She's a great person. I've known her for over 10 years. We used to work together at DHHS. And I know that she will be a great leader there, and she will probably be the glue for a lot of us to stay in touch over the course of the year. But anyway, last call for questions. If none, I want to thank everyone for coming, and feel free to visit the sponsors tables and our table out front. Take some giveaways and goodies with you, and we shall see you next year. Thank you.